Open Stax Chapter 6 continued, Section 6.3 Operant Conditioning. The previous section of this chapter focused on the type of associative learning known as classical conditioning. Remember that in classical conditioning, something in the environment triggers a reflex automatically, and researchers train the organism to react to a different stimulus. Now we turn to the second type of associative learning, operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, organisms learn to associate a behavior and its consequences. A pleasant consequence makes that behavior more likely to be repeated in the future. For example, Spirit, a dolphin at the National Aquarium in Baltimore, does a flip in the air when her trainer blows a whistle. The consequence is that she gets a goldfish. No, she gets a fish. Psychologist B.F. Skinner saw that classical conditioning is limited to existing behaviors that are reflexively excited, and it doesn't account for new behaviors such as riding a bike. He proposed a theory about how such behaviors come about. Skinner believed that behavior is motivated by the consequences we receive for the behavior, the reinforcements and punishments. His idea that learning is the result of consequences is based on the law of effect, which was first proposed by psychologist Edward Thorndike. According to the law of effect, behaviors that are followed by consequences that are satisfying to the organism are more likely to be repeated, and behaviors that are followed by unpleasant consequences are less likely to be repeated. Essentially, if an organism does something that brings about a desired result, the organism is more likely to do it again. If an organism does something that does not bring about a desired result, the organism is less likely to do it again. An example of the law of effect is in employment. One of the reasons, and often the main reason, we show up for work is because we get paid to do so. If we stop getting paid, we likely will stop showing up, even if we love our job. Working with Thorndike's law of effect as his foundation, Skinner began conducting scientific experiments on animals, mainly rats and pigeons, to determine how organisms learn through operant conditioning. He placed these animals inside an operant conditioning chamber, which has come to be known as a Skinner box. A Skinner box contains a lever for rats or disc for pigeons that the animal can press and peck for food reward via the dispenser. Speakers and lights can be associated with certain behaviors. A recorder counts the number of responses made by the animals. In discussing operant conditioning, we use several everyday words: positive, negative, reinforcement, and punishment in a specialized manner. In operant conditioning, positive and negative does not mean good or bad. Instead, positive means you are adding something, and negative means you are taking something away. Reinforcement means you are increasing a behavior, and punishment means you are decreasing a behavior. Reinforcement can be positive or negative, and punishment can be positive or negative. All reinforcers increase the likelihood of a behavioral response. All punishers decrease the likelihood of a behavioral response. Now let's combine these four terms: positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, and negative punishment. Reinforcement. The most effective way to teach a person or animal a new behavior is with positive reinforcement. In positive reinforcement, a desirable stimulus is added to increase a behavior. For example, you tell your 5-year-old son Jeremy that if he cleans his room, he will get a toy. Jeremy quickly cleans his room because he wants a new art set. Let's pause for a moment. Some people might say, why should I reward my child for doing what is expected? But in fact, we are constantly and consistently rewarded in our lives. Our paychecks are rewards, as are high grades and acceptances into our preferred schools. Being praised for doing a good job and for passing a driver's test is also a reward. Positive reinforcement as a learning tool is extremely effective. It has been found that one of the most effective ways to increase achievements in school districts with below average reading scores was to pay the children to read. Specifically, second grade students in Dallas were paid $2 each time they read a book and passed a short quiz about the book. The result was a significant increase in reading comprehension. What do you think about this program? If Skinner were alive today, he would probably think this was a great idea. He was a strong proponent of using operant conditioning principles to influence students' behaviors at school. In fact, in addition to the Skinner box, he also invented what he called a teaching machine that was designed to reward small steps in learning. An early forerunner of computer-assisted learning, his teaching machine tested students' knowledge as they worked through various school subjects. If students answered questions correctly, they received immediate positive reinforcement and could continue. If they answered incorrectly, they did not receive any reinforcement. The idea was that students would spend additional time studying the material to increase their chance of being reinforced the next time. In negative reinforcement, an undesirable stimulus is removed to increase a behavior. For example, car manufacturers use the principles of negative reinforcement in their seatbelt systems, which go beep, beep, beep until you fasten your seatbelt. The annoying sound stops when you exhibit the desired behavior, increasing the likelihood that you will buckle up in the future. Negative reinforcement is also used frequently in horse training. Riders apply pressure by pulling the reins and squeezing their legs, and then remove the pressure when the horse performs the desired behavior, such as turning or speeding up. The pressure is the negative stimulus that the horse wants to remove. Punishment. Many people confuse negative reinforcement with punishment in operant conditioning, but they are two very different mechanisms. Remember that reinforcement, even when it is negative, always increases a behavior. In contrast, punishment always decreases a behavior. In positive punishment, you add an undesirable stimulus to decrease a behavior. An example of positive punishment is scolding a student to get the student to stop texting in class. In this case, a stimulus, the reprimand, is added in order to decrease the behavior, texting in class. In negative punishment, you remove a pleasant stimulus to decrease behavior. For example, when a child misbehaves, a parent can take away a favorite toy. In this case, a stimulus, the toy, is removed in order to decrease the behavior. Punishment, especially when it is immediate, is one way to decrease undesirable behavior. For example, imagine your 4-year-old son, Brandon, hits his younger brother. You have Brandon write 100 times, "I will not hit my brother." Chances are he won't repeat this behavior. While strategies like this are common today, in the past, children were often subject to physical punishment, such as spanking. It is important to be aware of some of the drawbacks in using physical punishment on children. First, punishment may teach fear. Brandon may become fearful of the street, but he also may become fearful of the person who delivered the punishment, you, his parents. Similarly, children are punished by teachers who come to fear the Similarly, children who are punished by teachers may come to fear the teacher and try to avoid school. Consequently, most schools in the U.S. have banned corporal punishments. Second, punishment may cause children to become more aggressive and prone to antisocial behavior and delinquency. They see their parents resort to spanking when they become angry and frustrated. So in turn, they may act out this same behavior when they become angry and frustrated. For example, because you spank Brenda when you are angry with her for her misbehavior, she might start hitting her friends when they won't share their toys. While positive punishment can be effective in some cases, Skinner suggested that one of the punishments Skinner suggested that the use of punishment should be weighed against the possible negative effects. Today, psychologists and parenting experts favor reinforcement over punishment. They recommend that you catch your child doing something good and reward her for it. Shaping. In his operant conditioning experiments, Skinner often used an approach called shaping. Instead of rewarding only the target behaviors in shaping, we reward successive approximations of a target behavior. Why is shaping needed? Remember that in order for reinforcement to work, the organism must first display the behavior. Shaping is needed because it is extremely unlikely that an organism will display anything but the simplest of behaviors spontaneously. In shaping, behaviors are broken down into many small, achievable steps. The specific steps used in the process are the following. 1. Reinforce any response that resembles the desired behavior. 2. Then reinforce the response that more closely resembles the desired behavior. You will no longer reinforce the previously reinforced response. Three. Next, begin to reinforce the response that even more closely resembles the desired behavior. 4. Continue to reinforce closer and closer approximations of the desired behavior. And 5. Finally, only reinforce the desired behavior. Shaping is often used in teaching a complex behavior or chain of behaviors. Skinner used shaping to teach pigeons not only such relative simple behaviors as pecking a disc in a Skinner box, but also many unusual entertaining behaviors such as turning in circles, walking in figure eights, and even playing ping pong. The technique is commonly used by animal trainers today. An important part of shaping is stimulus discrimination. Recall Pavlov's dogs. He trained them to respond to the tone of a bell and not to similar tones or sounds. This discrimination is also important in operant conditioning and in shaping behavior. It is easy to see how shaping is effective in teaching behaviors to animals, but how does shaping work with humans? Let's consider parents whose goal is to have their child learn to clean his room. They use shaping to help him master steps towards the goal. Instead of performing the entire task, they set up these steps and reinforce each step. First, he cleans up 1 toy. Second, he cleans up 5 toys. Third, he chooses whether to pick up 10 toys or put his books and clothes away. Fourth, he cleans up everything except 2 toys. Finally, he cleans his entire room. Primary and secondary reinforcers. Rewards such as stickers, praise, money, toys, and more can be used to reinforce learning. Let's go back to Skinner's rats again. How did the rats learn to press the lever in the Skinner box? They were rewarded with food each time they pressed the lever. For animals, food would be an obvious reinforcer. What would be a good reinforcement for humans? For your daughter, Sydney, it would be the promise of a toy if she cleaned her room. How about Joaquin, the soccer player? If you gave Joaquin a piece of candy every time he made a goal, he would be using a primary reinforcement. Primary reinforcers are reinforcers that have innate reinforcing qualities. These kinds of reinforcers are not learned. Water, food, sleep, shelter, sex, and touch, among others, are primary reinforcers. Pleasure is also a primary reinforcer. Organisms do not lose their drive for these things. For most people, jumping in a cool lake on a very hot day would be reinforcing, and the cool lake would be innately reinforcing. The water would cool the person off, as well as provide pleasure. A secondary reinforcer has no inherent value and only has reinforcing qualities when linked with a primary reinforcer. Praise linked to affection is one example of a secondary reinforcer, as when you called out, "Great shot," every time Joaquin made a goal. Another example, money is only worth something when you use it to buy other things, either things that satisfy basic needs or other secondary reinforcers. If you were on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and you had stacks of money, the money would not be useful if you could not spend it. What about the stickers on the behavior chart? They also are secondary reinforcers. Sometimes instead of stickers on a sticker chart, a token is used. Tokens, which are also secondary reinforcers, can then be traded in for rewards and prizes. Entire behavior management systems, known as token economies, are built around the use of these kinds of token reinforcers. Token economies have found to be very effective at modifying behavior in a variety of settings such as schools, prisons, and mental hospitals. For example, a study by Kanji and Daly found that use of a token economy increased appropriate social behaviors and reduced inappropriate behaviors in a group of autistic school children. Autistic children tend to exhibit disruptive behaviors such as pinching and hitting. When the children in the study exhibited appropriate behaviors, they received a quiet hands token. When they hit or punched, they lost a token. The children then exchanged specified amounts of tokens for minutes of playtime. Reinforcement schedules. Remember, the best way to teach a person or animal a behavior is to use positive reinforcement. For example, Skinner used positive reinforcement to teach rats to press a lever in a Skinner box. At first, the rat might randomly hit the lever while exploring the box, and out would come a pellet of food. After eating the pellet, what do you think the hungry rat did next? It hit the lever again and received another pellet of food. Each time the rat hit the lever, a pellet of food came out. When an organism receives a reinforcer each time it displays a behavior, it is called a continuous reinforcement. This reinforcement schedule is the quickest way to teach someone a behavior, and it is especially effective in training a new behavior. Let's look back at the dog that was learning to sit earlier in this chapter. Now, each time he sits, you give him a treat. Timing is important here. You will be most successful if you present the reinforcer immediately after he sits, so that he can make an association between the target behavior and the consequences. Once a behavior is trained, researchers and trainers often turn to another type of reinforcement schedule. Partial reinforcement. In partial reinforcement, also referred to as intermittent reinforcements, the person or animal does not get reinforced every time they perform a desired behavior. There are several different types of partial reinforcement schedules. These schedules are described as either fixed or variable, and as either interval or ratio. Fixed refers to the number of responses between reinforcements, or the amount of time between reinforcement, which is set and unchanging. Variables refer to the number of responses or amount of time between reinforcements, which varies or changes. Interval means the schedule is based on the time between reinforcement, and ratio means the schedule is based on the number of responses between reinforcement. Now let's combine these four terms. A fixed interval reinforcement schedule is when behavior is rewarded after a set of amount of time. For example, June undergoes major surgery in a hospital. During recovery, she is expected to experience pain and will require prescription medication for pain relief. June is given an IV drop with a patient-controlled painkiller. Her doctor sets a limit, one dose per hour. June pushes a button when pain becomes difficult, and she receives a dose of medication. Since the reward only occurs on a fixed interval, there is no point in exhibiting the behavior when it will not be rewarded. With a variable interval reinforcement schedule, the person or animal gets the reinforcement based on varying amounts of time, which are unpredictable. Say that Manuel is the manager of a fast food restaurant. Every once in a while, someone from the quality control division comes to Manuel's restaurant. If the restaurant is clean and the service is fast, everyone on the shift earns a $20 bonus. Manuel never knows when the quality control person will show up, so he always tries to keep the restaurant clean and ensure that his employees provide prompt and courteous service. His productivity regarding prompt service and keeping a clean restaurant are steady because he wants his crew to earn the bonus. With a fixed ratio reinforcement schedule, there are a set of number of responses that must occur before the behavior is rewarded. Carla sells glasses at an eyeglass store, and she earns a commission every time she sells a pair of glasses. She always tries to sell more pairs of glasses, including prescription sunglasses or a backup pair, so she can increase her commission. She does not care if the person really needs the prescription sunglasses. Carla just wants her bonus. The quality of what Carla sells does not matter because her commission is not based on quality. It is only based on the number of pairs sold. This distinction in the quality of performance can help determine which reinforcement method is most appropriate for a particular situation. Fixed ratios are better suited to optimize the quantity of output, whereas a fixed interval in which the reward is not quantity based can lead to higher quality of output. In a variable ratio reinforcement schedule, the number of responses needed for a reward varies. This is the most powerful partial reinforcement schedule. An example of the variable ratio reinforcement schedule is gambling. Imagine that Sarah, generally a smart, thrifty woman, visits Las Vegas for the first time. She's not a gambler, but out of a curiosity, she puts a quarter into the slot machine and then another and another. Nothing happens. $2.25 later, her curiosity is fading, and she is just about to quit. But then, the machine lights up, bells go off, and Sarah gets 50 quarters back. That's more like it. Sarah gets back to inserting quarters with renewed interest, and a few minutes later, she used up all of her gains and is $10 in the hole. Now might be a sensible time to quit. And yet she keeps putting money into the slot machine because she never knows when the next reinforcement is coming. She keeps thinking that with the next quarter she could win $50 or $100 or even more. Because the reinforcement schedule in the most types of gambling has a variable ratio schedule, people keep trying and hoping that the next time they will win big. This is one of the reasons that gambling is so addictive and so resistant to extinction. In operant conditioning, extinction of a reinforced behavior occurs at some point after reinforcement stops, and the speed at which this happens depends on the reinforcement schedule. In a variable ratio, the point of extinction comes very slowly, as described above, but in the other reinforcement schedules, extinction may come quickly. For example, if June presses a button for the pain relief medication before the allotted time her doctor has approved, no medication is administered. She is on a fixed interval reinforcement schedule, so extinction occurs quickly when reinforcement doesn't come at the expected time. Among the reinforcement schedules, variable ratio is the most productive and the most resistant to extinction. Fixed intervals is the least productive and the easiest to extinguish. Cognition and latent learning. Although strict behaviorists such as Skinner and Watson refuse to believe that cognition plays a role in learning, another behaviorist, Edward C. Tolman, had a different opinion. Tolman's experiments with rats demonstrated that organisms can learn even if they do not receive immediate reinforcements. This finding was in conflict with the prevailing idea at the time that reinforcement must be immediate in order for learning to occur, thus suggesting a cognitive aspect to learn. In the experiment, Tolman placed hungry rats in a maze with no reward for finding their way out. He also studied a comparison group that was rewarded with food at the end of the maze. As the unreinforced rats explore the maze, they develop a cognitive map, a mental picture of the layout of the maze. After 10 sessions in the maze without reinforcement, food was placed in a gold box at the end of the maze. As soon as the rats became aware of the food, they were able to find their way through the maze quickly, just as quickly as the comparison group, which had been rewarded with food all along. This is known as latent learning, learning that occurs but is not observable in behaviors until there is no reason to demonstrate it. Until there is a reason to demonstrate it. Latent learning also occurs in humans. Children may learn by watching the action of their parents, but only demonstrate it at a later date. When the learned material is needed, for example, suppose that Ravi's dad drives him to school every day. In this way, Ravi learns the route from home to school, but he's never driven there himself, so he has not had a chance to demonstrate that he's learned the way. One morning, Ravi's dad had to leave early for a meeting, so he can't drive Ravi to school. Instead, Ravi follows the same route on his bike that his dad would have taken in the car. This demonstrates latent learning. Ravi had learned the route to school, but had no need to demonstrate the knowledge earlier.